From NPR and the Futuro Media Group, it's Latino USA. I'm Maria Hinojosa. The Latino vote. Why do politicians and pundits seem to think it's a one-size-fits-all group?
And we, got into one or two arguments on Facebook. And then I was just like, you know what? I really just don't want to have these arguments. It just makes me really angry. So I have to step back.
You'll hear the wide range of political opinions in Latino families and how one majority-Latino town proves why representation matters.
There was something simmering just underneath the surface that made these people say, enough. We have had enough.
Plus, the lengths politicians go to be Latino-friendly. Coming up on Latino USA, I'm Maria Hinojosa.
I think every speech should begin with a shot of tequila.
Stay with us, no te vayas. Hey, if you enjoy Latino USA, I think you'll love NPR's Planet Money. The show is full of funny, insightful stories about how the world works. Just think, what if everybody knew how much everyone else made? Find out about the messed up economics of drought. And learn about the psychology of a big red button. Find Planet Money now at npr.org/podcasts and on the NPR One app. Welcome to Latino USA. I'm Maria Hinojosa. We're a year away from Election Day, just a few months from the primaries, but everywhere you look, there are endless stories about the candidates.
The horse race to the 2016 presidential election is heating up.
The race for 2016, it is heating up.
Candidates are picking up the pace.
And just like every election season, there's plenty of talk about something called the Latino vote.
The coveted Latino vote.
Hispanic voters.
Courting Latinos.
The Latino vote.
The Latino vote. Latino voters.
So what is the Latino vote? Politicians and pundits talk about it as if it were one vote for one party or one issue. But here at Latino USA, we know that's not true. Our producer, Fernanda Chavarri, spoke with a family who really exemplifies that.
That's right. I came across the Canino Vasquez family, who have very different political beliefs, and that leads to some lively conversations at the dinner table.
I'm Ana Canino Flute, and I am 39 years old. I am originally from Puerto Rico.
Ana, the oldest sister, she's sort of middle of the road. She's the one that kind of keeps the whole family together and tries to prevent the arguments from getting a little more heated. She lives here in New York, and she has 2 kids. Her husband is a pastor, and her youngest brother, Juan, is a police officer in Florida with very conservative beliefs, and her youngest sister, Rose.
I would say that I am a pretty die-hard progressive.
That's Rose. She kind of sounds like Ana.
There are very few issues on which I fall over on the side of the conservatives for a lot of different reasons. Mostly because I think they kind of hate people like me. I'm not your sort of traditional heterosexual person. I'm an atheist.
Okay, the siblings are literally far left, far right, and then one in the middle. So what about the parents?
The parents actually kind of go pretty far out on opposite sides of the spectrum. The mother is very religious, conservative, Republican, and Ana says her father is a little more moderate, but still more on the Democrat side.
I wouldn't say that he would think of himself as terribly progressive in the sense that, he struggles with some of gay rights issues and all that kind of stuff.
So you have one Latino family, and literally their political views are across the spectrum.
The issues that we disagree on most often are things like the Black Lives Matters movement. My brother, as a police officer, feels very under attack when he sees those kind of issues come up. Another issue that we definitely disagree is family planning, abortion rights. There's definitely disagreement on those issues.
Did they tell you about anything that they sometimes might agree on?
Well, sort of. Here's Ana.
It's funny. Like, I would think it would be a slam dunk for us to all be anti-Trump with his anti-Latino stances. But my brother was joking around about supporting Trump. And we're like, are you kidding me? I don't know.
So does that cause tension in the family?
So yes, there is some tension, and because the members of the family are sprinkled throughout the United States, a lot of that tension is showing up on social media, actually.
I used to follow my brother on Facebook. I love you, Juan. I do still look at your Facebook now and then. But I think he used to follow me, and I don't think he does anymore. Early on, he would post something, and we, got into one or two arguments on Facebook. It's hard for me. And that's why, I don't read his Facebook page. I have to step back.
So they're not just disagreeing on the internet. Last Thanksgiving dinner, after everybody was finished eating, Ana, remember, she's more the moderate older sister, she kind of had to intervene between her liberal sister and conservative brother when they got into a heated argument.
I'm thinking back on the day that we had that big
blowout,
Black Lives Matter. And I did a little bit of sort of I'm hearing you say X. Try to sort of make you guys talk on the same level.
Yeah.
And at a certain point, I did go I'm going to go to bed.
Yeah, it was pretty late at night, so.
And I would say, we have these disagreements. We live with each other, and it doesn't affect our day-to-day interactions with each other. Most of the time, it might mean a slightly awkward car conversation that you're like, oh, I shouldn't have started this conversation right now. But we never stop loving each other because we have these opinions. Nobody stops calling each other because we have different opinions. We might stay up till 3 a.m. arguing about it, but the next morning you have breakfast and it's good.
I mean, even my own family. I remember, my brother, radical, young, high school student, arguing with my father, the American citizen, medical doctor, very serious. It happened, and then we'd have dinner and it would be okay.
And actually, that happens more than we think across the United States in Latino families and for the Canino Vasquez family. And it really bothers Rose and Ana when politicians and some in the media try to address Latinos and the Latino vote as if they were all the same.
Ultimately, the effect is an alienating one. And I think if they realized how alienating and how much of a turnoff that sort of one-size-fits-all perspective is, if they realize that, I think they might make a different decision about how they talk about stuff.
When people say that the Latino vote is monolithic or it's one issue, it erases the idea that we all come from different nations and different countries of origin who have different issues.
Now, the Canino Vasquez family is like a lot of Latino families. They're all over the political map. And as Latinos become a bigger piece of the electorate every election cycle, it's become more important for politicians to understand how Latinos vote and what issues matter most to us. Examining this dramatic demographic shift in the U.S. is at the core of another project we produce here called America by the Numbers, which began as a television series on PBS. To kick off our 2016 election coverage, we're going to do a little bit of that and ask, what is the Latino vote, by looking at data, trends, and issues by the numbers. Here's a number to start. By Election Day 2016, there will be an estimated 27 million eligible Latino voters. To help put that in context, 30 years ago, there were only 5 to 7 million Latinos eligible to vote. Recently, I sat down with Latino USA's digital director, Julio Ricardo Varela, and Cristina Mora, who is a sociology professor at UC Berkeley. Cristina writes about the history of Latino identity, so we thought she'd be a good person to ask about how the concept of a Latino vote came to be. Julio starts us off.
Candidates are just assuming, from the Democratic perspective, that that all Latinos vote Democratic, which is obviously not true. And if you look at the history of the quote unquote Latino vote and who really kind of got that Latino vote, like in the 80s and the 90s, it was actually, Ronald Reagan and Padrino.
I mean, I think Julio's right to point to history. I mean, it even goes much further back than even the Reagan administration. When I think of the Latino vote historically, it's really, I guess I would describe it as sort of Latinos trying to create a space and trying to see themselves within the Democratic Party, but with a lot of sort of ground roots mobilizing, caucusing, and sort of coming together to say, hey, we're here, we're part of it. But when I think about the way the Republican Party and the Latino vote, I almost see the opposite, at least historically, right? It's much more the Republican Party sort of strategizing, how can we get them? How can we court them? How can we be behind them? So, for example, this issue of, the Latino vote and party politics, it was actually Nixon way back in his reelection campaign in 1972, who did one of the first assessments of the Latino voter. He actually had his reelection campaign alongside with the RNC go out and canvass Puerto Rican voters in New York, Cuban voters in Florida, and voters in the Southwest. You didn't see this sort of amount of active courting, wanting to understand, wanting to capture this vote on the Democratic side.
Wow, Nixon was actually courting and analyzing and polling for Latino votes.
Nixon was from the Southwest. He sort of grew up in Yorba Linda. He grew up around sort of Mexican Americans and knew that this was a population that was big in the Southwest and that existed, right? And by 1972, he was sort of seeing this is a large number. I know they're different and I know they're distinct from whites. And he was at this point where he really wanted to win his second reelection campaign. So he puts together something called the Brown Mafia. And the Brown Mafia...
This is great.
The Brown Mafia.
It's great, right? The Brown Mafia brings together two of Nixon's sort of networks into the Latino world. He has one sort of network of affluent businessmen, Mexican Americans, largely in the Southern California area where he's from. His other set of networks are his networks to the Cuban community, which he had fostered since getting into office in Florida, right? And what they did is they coordinated these amigo buses, is what they called them. These were these campaign buses that would go around Latino neighborhoods. So what's funny is that these amigos buses, those that traveled in the East Coast, in Puerto Rican neighborhoods and in Cuban neighborhoods, played salsa. But those that went to Texas and California played mariachi. So they almost had this real nuanced understanding of who the voter was. And this was really the first time. I mean, you didn't see the Democratic National Party doing this. Even though, for example, Mexican Americans had been important for the Kennedy election, for the Johnson election, they had created Viva Kennedy, Viva Johnson campaigns. But you saw this as their organic Mexican Americans coming together because they thought that this politician was important and this politician could address their needs. This is different from Nixon strategizing almost from the top down about how to court and how to get at this vote. And the number of Latinos that voted for Nixon between 68 and 72 jumped up fivefold. So this was really, yeah.
But I'm thinking, Julio, I mean, if you're a Republican Party head, I'm just saying we had the Latino vote. We had the strategy. We were ahead of the Democrats on this. And then we're here?
Right. I mean, it's almost like Nixon put a little accent on the O, Nixon, I'm like...
Coming up, what happened after Nixon? Our conversation with Cristina Mora continues. Stay with us, no te vayas.
Les gustan mucho los coches, los vinos y la paseada. Después de tantos derroches se los lleva la tiznada que
Caminé ese camino, me encontré con su brillo. Esa es una verdad, en mí siempre vivirá. Caminé ese camino, me encontré con su brillo. Esa es una verdad, en mí siempre vivirá. ya está tan lejos de aquí. Aún me estremezco ahora cuando me encuentro ahí. Por un momento una niña solo quería ser feliz. Caminé ese camino, me encontré con su brillo. Esa es una verdad, en mí siempre vivirá.
Thank you so much for listening to this week's Latino USA about the Latino vote. It means so much to me that you would make time in your day to listen to us. Now, I want to ask you a favor. If you love what we're doing, and I know you do, if you can take a couple of seconds to rate and review our show on iTunes, it will help us a lot. And for all of you who are die-hard Latino USA fans, one big favor to ask. Go to latinousa.org and click on the donate button. I got to tell you, every single donation, seriously, no matter how small or how big, really helps us out. And we love to get your letters. So keep them coming and those donations. Muchas gracias, everyone.
Support for NPR comes from NPR member stations and from Lumber Liquidators, a proud sponsor of NPR, offering more than 400 styles including hardwood, bamboo, laminate, and vinyl. With flooring specialists in hundreds of stores nationwide, more at lumberliquidators.com or 1-800-HARDWOOD. And the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, working with others to build a culture of health, enabling all in America's diverse society to lead healthier lives now and for generations to come. On the web at rwjf.org.
Welcome back to Latino USA. I'm Maria Hinojosa. And when we left off, we were going over some history with Cristina Mora, who's a sociology professor at UC Berkeley. She told us about Nixon's approach to courting the Latino vote, which back then was called the Spanish-speaking vote. We're going to continue that conversation in a minute. But before we jump back in, it might be helpful to know what happened in the decades following Nixon. Since 1980, the majority of Latino votes have gone to Democratic candidates in every presidential election. But Latinos haven't only been voting for Democratic candidates. Reagan, Bush Sr., and George W. Bush all got a significant share of the Latino vote. So, how did that happen? Well, Republicans like Ronald Reagan were trying to target Latino voters by emphasizing that, like the Republican Party itself, Latinos are family-oriented, that they share family values.
I predict that in the years to come, it is the Republican Party that Americans of Hispanic descent will flock to in ever-increasing numbers.
This was also the time when Reagan signed the 1986 immigration reform bill that gave almost 3 million undocumented immigrants a path to citizenship. On the other hand, Reagan vowed to scale back bilingual education. And as California's governor, he had cut social services that were important to Latino families. By then, Democratic candidates were earning more Latino votes, but they weren't actively trying to maintain them. Democrats were simply relying on the assumption that Latinos leaned left. It's important to keep in mind that it wasn't until around 1990 that the country became aware of exactly how many Latinos were even living here. Prior to that, poorly designed census questions made it so that we just didn't really know. After the so-called Reagan Revolution and Bill Clinton's presidency, in the 2000 election, George W. Bush echoed Reagan's sentiments about family values.
More Hispanic Americans own their own homes today than ever before. Mexican Americans are firmly committed to leaving no child behind in America.
His religious conviction resonated with many Latinos, as did his focus on national security, according to exit polls. Bush was the last Republican candidate to score a sizable percentage of Latino votes, close to half of them. But for the last two elections, Latinos voted heavily in favor of Obama, over 70% in the last election. So, if history has taught us anything, it's that the Latino vote is incredibly complex and volatile. Even if recent numbers show Latinos identifying more with Democrats, the majority of Latinos are actually registered as independents. So we just can't assume we know how Latinos will vote. Going back now to the conversation with Cristina and Julio, I asked Cristina what she thinks is the biggest misconception about Latino voters.
I mean, I think it's just this idea that they're only equated with immigration, right? Latinos are diverse. They've got different needs, different interests. They've got different political views based on sort of age and generation status. And so, it's not all about immigration. The economy, right? And so I constantly see these framings in the news media of sort of Latinos in the bag or Latinos only about immigration. And I think, wow, what a one-sided view of the community, right? What a sort of caricature of Latinos.
There is perhaps a lost opportunity. What if either party, either whatever candidate, was actually to tie immigration to the economy as a positive? We always tie immigration to the economy as a negative. If we get this right on the path to legalization, bringing people out of the shadows, it's actually going to grow our economy. And that works for everybody, not just Latinos.
Right. I think that would be money well spent for the Democratic Party, and as opposed to getting on stage with Mark Anthony and doing Viva Hillary and doing Selena videos and whatever, and just assuming that we are this different community from the United States, that we have to be, I'm not your Hillary, I'm tu Hillary, where people see through that now and they don't see it as authentic. I do agree with you, Maria, on that sense where if you're going to outreach now, I think we're kind of past the Latino vote is important phase that, I think you have a very engaged, informed community, but they're not seeing the depth of these issues yet. And they're not being treated with respect. And I think, and it's making the assumption that they're not an intelligent electorate.
So everybody talks about the importance of the Latino vote. And I'm just wondering, there are so many narratives that we can take away from what's going to happen in a year, because we've got a year to go. But is it about Latinos running for office, local office? Is it about Latinos swinging districts? What do you think is like the big message, the takeaway in the importance of the Latino vote?
Oh, it's certainly all of the above. And the big framing that I would think is this is a youthful, dissatisfied, vote that's up and coming, and it's growing across the nation. It's not just in the Southwest, not just in the Northeast. It's in the Midwest. It's in New England, and it's in these places. And they're youthful, and they're not willing to sit on their hands. I always balk when I hear this issue of the Latino sleeping giant and when is it going to wake up and whatnot. But I think that they are these issues, the dreamer movement being especially important and being sort of a real image of where Latinos are going. They're not willing to just sit down and sort of wait or not go to the polls, right? They're going to take to town halls. They're going to take to social media. They're going to take their message as far as they can get.
Amigos bus. Just got to bring back the Amigos bus.
But here's the difference. I don't think they're going to get on the bus, right?
We're going to drive them.
They're going to ask the bus driver, where are you going? What's your message? This is the route you're going to take. Y si no te gusta, vámonos.
Or create your own bus.
It would be the Latino driving the bus or the Latina driving, and it's our own bus. And we're like, hola, estamos aquí. But thank you so much for joining us on Latino USA, Cristina.
Thank you very much, Maria.
And thank you, Julio Ricardo Varela.
Como siempre, Maria. Gracias.
By the numbers, there are 26 million Latinos eligible to vote in the United States, and that keeps growing. But only about half of them actually show up to vote on Election Day. Low turnout is also part of the reason why you don't see a lot of Latinos in public office. Latinos make up 17% of the population of the country, but only 1% of its elected officials. Now, this is called the representation gap. And get this, it affects Latinos more than almost any other group. And actually, in some counties with a majority Latino population, there isn't a single Latino representative. Latino USA producer Marlon Bishop is going to take us now to one place where the representation gap is particularly dramatic, Pasco, Washington.
In the 1940s, a little town called Pasco helped usher in the atomic age. The U.S. military thought the desert plains of eastern Washington seemed like a good place to put a secret nuclear weapons factory, and the town grew alongside it. Then in the 60s, irrigation came, and the desert bloomed. Pasco became known to migrant workers from Mexico and Texas as a place ripe with asparagus, cherries, potatoes, pears, all in need of harvesting. Latino farm workers came to pick the fruit and eventually stayed to plant roots of their own. Today, the city is 59% Latino. Drive through downtown Pasco and you'll find taco shop upon taco shop, and more than one store with puffy pink quinceañera dresses in the windows. But the people who call the shots around here are almost entirely white. The mayor is white. The city manager is white. The school board, all white. The 3 county commissioners, you guessed it, white. The county prosecutor, white. The sheriff, also white. The city council, 5 white people and 1 Latino. And that's just how it's always been in Pasco. But then, on February 10th, 2015, something happened that changed the political conversation in town on an atomic scale.
I saw something posted on a Facebook page that said, "You're not going to believe what just happened in downtown Pasco."
This is Rick Rios. He grew up around Pasco, moved away, and came back to town in his 60s. In the video, Rick saw a man appears to throw a rock at 3 police officers. One of the officers fires back at him with his gun. Then the man runs across the street and down the sidewalk. The cops pursue him with their guns drawn.
He stops, turns around, and what you see is he has both hands up in the air, and then they open up on him, and he drops there.
The man shot dead in the video was Antonio Zambrano Montes, an undocumented farm worker from Mexico who struggled with mental illness. The medical examiner would later find out that his blood contained large quantities of meth when the incident happened. The police would later say in their report that he had another rock in his hand and seemed to be winding up to throw it when they opened fire on him. But that's not what it looked like in the video circulating online. It looked like police chased a man down and killed him with his arms out in front of him, as if he was trying to stop the bullets with his bare hands.
I was astonished. I couldn't believe it.
Meet Bertha Alicia Correa. She's 19 years old, born and raised in Pasco. She's a college student and a substitute teacher. And a few years back, Bertha lived next door to Antonio, the man killed by police.
We didn't know him as a meth head, drug addict person that acts out. We knew him as a guy that was in a relationship with another woman that had 2 smaller children that would be outside playing with the kids.
The incident really affected Bertha. Maybe it was because her dad, just like Antonio, is a farm worker. Maybe it was because her own brother is mentally ill. She imagined what would the police do if it was her brother out there throwing rocks? Would they shoot him too? She didn't know it yet, but watching that 22-second video would change everything for her.
It was on a Tuesday when it happened, so Wednesday after work, I actually walked down to City Hall because I had to pay some bills, and there was a crowd of people. It surprised me that people gathered so quickly. I mean, this is a community where you don't really see that.
A protest today over the police killing of a man in Washington state earlier this week, all of it captured on video.
A week after the shooting, around 700 Pasco residents took to the streets. Bertha was out among them. So was Rick Rios. It was the largest protest the city could remember.
There was something simmering just underneath the surface that made these people say, "Enough. We have had enough."
After the protest ended, Bertha kept showing up at City Hall with a small group of activists. She was barely out of high school and had never been involved in politics before, but justice for Antonio became an obsession for her. The demonstrators were calling for accountability from the police, but time and again they were frustrated by how the city's leadership handled the case. They complained that having police from neighboring cities lead the investigation was a conflict of interest, and that there were long delays in the process. In the end, prosecutor Sean Sant decided the officers would not be charged. He believes this was a case of a mentally ill person who fell through the cracks, that it was not about race.
Even Mr. Zambrano's own family said they didn't think race had anything to do with it. I mean, the first officer to arrive on scene is also Hispanic. When we evaluated this case, the situation, it wouldn't have mattered whatever the race of the individual.
For Bertha, the decision not to charge the officers showed her that the city government wasn't representing her or her community. But it was the personal interactions she had with city leaders that really got under her skin. A few weeks after the shooting, she attended a city council meeting with a few other activists. After the meeting, she went over to say hi to the council members.
We're just shaking the hands of the council members and talking to them. And as I go in to shake a council member's hand, they decide to tell me that they don't shake the hands of ignorant people.
That's when she had enough. If she wanted to get things changed in Pasco, she would try and do it herself. She was going to run for city council.
I talked to my mom about it, and she just looked at me like, "You're crazy." I told her, I'm like, you know what? I know I'm crazy, but I'm going to do it.
Bertha wasn't the only one to run. 6 Latinos put their names in the hat for council races, more than anybody could remember in years past.
I think it brought a lot of interest in the way local government works.
This is Matt Watkins, the mayor of Pasco.
The problem, though, is if you end up having interest when there are dramatic events in your community, sometimes those people only run or become involved because of a narrow, single issue.
But the shooting led some in the community to imagine how things would be different if Latinos had a seat at the table. The primary election came in August, 7 months after the shooting. Altogether, 4 people were running for the seat Bertha was running for, and she made it through to the runoff. She couldn't believe it.
And I was like, am I reading this right?
Now, this 19-year-old had a shot at winning the council seat for Pasco's District 1. If there's any district a Latino should be able to win, this is it. It's made of downtown and East Pasco, which is the most Latino neighborhood in the city. Her opponent in the race is Al Yenny, a 69-year-old auto shop owner who has represented District 1 for 8 years.
I'm happy to have a challenger, and hopefully she comes back in 4 years and has a little more experience and maybe opens up her vision a little bit to what needs to be taken care of.
And Al Yenny believes that Bertha's biggest issues, police reform and the Antonio Zambrano shooting, aren't enough to tip the election.
I think most of the people that I know of, what I would call the silent majority, is not that upset with the city of Pasco and how this turned out.
Whether he's right about that or not, it's true that Bertha's chances aren't great. One reason is that about 30% of Pasco's Latino community is believed to be undocumented and cannot vote. But for the Latinos in Pasco who are citizens, voter participation is really low. So even though Latinos are a majority in Pasco, it's mostly white people who are doing the voting. This is something Saul Martinez thinks about a lot. He's the city's lone Latino council member.
We've tried to make strides in pushing for people to get registered and for people to vote, but it's been real hard because the majority of the Latinos in our area are hardworking people who are dedicated to their families and don't have time for all this extracurricular involvement.
On top of all that, Pasco's own election system makes it harder for a Latino candidate to win. That's because even though Bertha is running to represent a heavily Latino neighborhood, the whole city votes for her seat in the general election. Pasco plans to change the system next year, and when that happens, it'll probably help the chances of Latinos getting elected. And as the years pass, more Latinos will be voting and more qualified candidates will be stepping up to run. That's what Rick Rios hopes, at least. He says if something good came out of the shooting, it's that it made Latinos in Pasco realize they have to get involved.
There will never be fewer Hispanics in the country than there is today. And eventually, the message will get to them. You need to get registered and you need to vote because you can start a revolution and not fire a single shot in this country.
As for Bertha, she's aware she might not win this time around, but at least she's trying.
Like Gandhi said, be the change you want to see in the world. Like, you have to work for it or else it's not going to happen.
Bertha knows there's time to gain skills and run again if she doesn't make it. And one day, when she does, the City Council of Pasco will start to look a little more like the city itself.
Producer Marlon Bishop with that story. So, Marlon, there's this cliffhanger, obviously. You visited Pasco and spoke to all of these people before Election Day. So the elections are over, and what happened? Did Berta win?
Well, I called her up, and I asked her.
Well, unfortunately, I did not get elected. I got 27% of the vote. I'm a little heartbroken, but I mean, if it's not this time, then it'll be next time.
Well, I, for one, am definitely looking forward to seeing how her political career progresses. Thanks, Marlon. Coming up, the delicate performance art of pandering to Hispanic voters.
He did the ultimate Hispandering thing. He married an actual Mexican woman.
But first, we check in with another group of highly sought-after voters, millennials. No te vayas. Hey, if you enjoy Latino USA, I think you'll love NPR's Planet Money. The show is full of funny, insightful stories about how the world works. Just think, what if everybody knew how much everyone else made? Find out about the messed up economics of drought. And learn about the psychology of a big red button. Find Planet Money now at npr.org/podcasts and on the NPR One app.
Solo sé que ya te quiero conocer. Esperado a verte y muero por saber cómo me vas a mirar al despertar y saber que nunca me voy a alejar. Y a mí la Yamila, mila, ven, Yamila, mila, ven, Yamila, Yamila, mila, ven, Yamila, mila, ven, Yamila, Yamila, mila, ven, Yamila, mila, ven. Solo sé que ya te quiero conocer.
Support for NPR comes from NPR member stations and from the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation, helping people build measurably better lives, supporting efforts to make education more affordable for students and flexible for teachers through open educational resources, online at hewlett.org. And the SCAN Foundation, working to advance a coordinated system of high-quality services for older adults that preserve dignity and independence. More information is available at thescanfoundation.org.
Welcome back to Latino USA. I'm Maria Hinojosa, and on today's show, we're asking this question: what is the Latino vote? Now, one thing we've learned is that Latinos tend to vote more based on issues rather than on party. We put out a call on our social media for people to send us voice memos about what issues are most important to you, and here's what some of you had to say.
Hi, my name is Maya Matalon. I'm Argentinian and Israeli. The issues that most speak to me when I think about what candidate I'm going to vote for revolves around, firstly, reproductive rights. I'm also very concerned about the current issues with gun violence in our country and gun control.
This is Cam Juarez from the Tucson Unified School District Governing Board. The first issue, of course, is humane and comprehensive immigration reform. The second issue, I think, is affordable housing.
Hi, my name is Jasmine Contreras, and I am an organizer at Adelante Alabama Workers Center. Immigration reform is something that has been on the table for years. There still hasn't been able to be some type of resolution for it, and I'm just very saddened by that. I would hope that the candidate that is going to take the presidency next is someone that truly fights for that.
Thank you, Maya, Cam, and Yasmin, for telling us what's important to you. And as we cover the election this year, we'll keep on asking you questions, so follow us on Facebook and on Twitter for opportunities to share your thoughts with us.
A young woman graduated from the University of Colorado in 2015. She is a member of the Phi Lambda Chi Latina sorority, who also co-sponsored this event. Let's hear it for the sorority.
This is sound from the My Country, My Vote rally that happened recently in Colorado. The rally was sponsored by several organizations, including Voto Latino, whose aim is to get more Latino millennials registered to vote.
I come before all of you as an orgullosa Latina.
Now, if there's another voting demographic talked about as much as Latinos, it's millennials. Of course, these two demographics overlap. A major chunk of potential Latino voters are millennials, but a lot of them aren't getting to the polls. Two of our millennial producers, Fernanda Chavarri and Antonia Cerejido, got together in our studio to talk about what Latino millennial voters care about and why they're not voting more.
Antonia, we wanted to have this conversation because just as we're talking about the Latino vote, we also wanted to talk about the millennial vote.
20% of millennials are Latino, and just the term millennial encompasses an incredibly, incredibly diverse group of people.
Absolutely.
And so actually I talked to Maria Teresa Kumar, who's the president of Voto Latino, who is one of the groups that organized this My Country, My Vote rally.
The average Latino voter is 27 years old. The average white voter is 42.
800,000 Latinos turn 18 years old every year.
Right. And somebody who kind of realized like the magnitude of the Latino vote is Rosario Dawson.
Rosario Dawson partnered with a gentleman by the name of Phil Colon roughly 10 years ago, and they were responding to Puff Daddy's campaign that was talking about vote or die, that targeted African-American young people.
I love that this started with Puff Daddy.
All good things start with Puff Daddy. Young Latinos who grew up in the U.S. are also watching MTV, but they're not being targeted.
Yeah, and nobody's asking them what issues matter to them when it comes to voting.
When they first started out, Maria Teresa noticed that they had to combat a lot of pre-existing notions of what young Latinos cared about.
And it was hard because we were basically trying to change the way Americans thought of what a Latino was. We were encouraging folks that we wanted to talk to American Latino young people.
So fast forward to today, and Voto Latinos learned a lot through their process of trying to get people involved. They do a lot of things. They use celebrity endorsements. They text people the day of elections, which actually gets people to come out to the polls by 8% more. And they also do these trainings at Stanford.
My name's J. Diego Sarasua.
Diego is a student at the University of Nevada, Reno, and he was part of one of the Voto Latino trainings, and he was part of the news program. And so he's been out reporting in Nevada, which is the swing state. I asked him what's one of the main reasons Latino millennials don't vote.
We discovered it was a lack of maybe putting that information in a format where it was convenient, mostly a lack of information.
It's really not that young Latinos do not care about the political issues, but maybe it hasn't sort of been instilled in them. It hasn't been taught in their homes.
Yeah, I mean, it's very, very likely that their parents weren't voters. You know, if they're the child of immigrants, now they're first-time voters. You need to know a lot of new information if you're going to do that. And that's the thing. These people really do care about very specific things in their lives, and they want to be engaged.
If you look at the recent studies, millennial Latinos are much more drawn to issues than to candidates. And I think it's because they are more skeptical of the system. They're learning the system.
So what did Maria Teresa tell you were some of those issues that Latino millennials care so much about?
There is one issue that makes Latinas in particular go out to the polls.
They are more likely to register and vote if at the local level there is a woman's right to choose on the ballot.
Interesting.
For some reason, I was shocked by that because a lot of Latinos are Catholic, and maybe I doubt their moms feel the same way.
One of my biggest irks is when people cite 70 cents on the dollar that a woman makes and fail to realize that the largest generation behind us of Americans are young women who happen to be Latina who are earning 55 cents on the dollar.
If Latina women have to work this much harder to make a certain amount of money, having a kid and having more expenses, it makes sense that it's something they really care about.
And what about men? Did Maria Teresa say anything about how young Latinos are driven to the polls? Any issues that are particularly important to them?
Not really. In fact, Latino millennial men they're just less involved. 51% of Latinas who are registered to vote actually vote, in comparison to only 39% of Latino men.
So the idea here is to get this fast-growing population involved in the voting process. And millennials are changing the demographics of even what the Latino vote has been in this country. If, Antonia, you and I were having this conversation 30 years ago and we would be talking about what the Latino vote is, it'd be very different. I spoke with Mark Hugo Lopez from the Pew Research Center, and he said this.
So the Hispanic electorate back in the 80s was a somewhat older electorate, also somewhat more rooted in its U.S. roots, and also one that wasn't necessarily quite as young as the one we have today. The second generation, that is the children of immigrants, the U.S.-born children of immigrant parents, actually make up the bulk now of Hispanic eligible voters.
This is one of the reasons why Latino millennials are so important, because we are a big chunk of this country's Latino vote as a whole, and we're only growing.
And in talking to Maria Teresa Kumar, the thing that really impacted me when I talked to her was that she's talking about how the average American voter is older. And so in a way, their vote is like kind of nostalgic. For instance, like women's right to choose. If a woman in her 40s or 50s is voting on that, it might not necessarily affect them. But young Latinas, they're voting on their present. They're voting on their future.
American Latinos are the fastest growing workforce and the fastest group of Americans. And when they're polled, most Americans think that our best days are behind us. And you have a whole generation of American Latinos who actually see the future as bright, that they can actually be in the driver's seat. And we have to make sure not only do we make room for them, but make sure that we're giving them the information and the tools so that they make that real, not just for themselves and their families, but for the country.
Our producers, Fernanda Chavari and Antonia Cerejido. While some groups are trying hard to get that Latino millennial vote, the candidates themselves are working hard to appeal to Latinos in general. And sometimes it seems like they're willing to do almost anything to convince Latinos that they're chévere and with it. We called up Lalo Alcaraz, creator of the cartoon La Cucaracha, and Gustavo Arellano, who's the author of the syndicated column Ask a Mexican. And we asked them if they could come up with their favorite examples of pandering that they've seen from this year's crop of presidential candidates, or as it's sometimes known, Hispandering.
Hey, I'm Gustavo Arellano, and I'm here with my longtime compa, Lalo Alcaraz. ¿Qué tal, Lalo?
Hey, what's happening?
I remember the days when politicians, to reach out for the Latino audience, they'd go to either King Taco in L.A. or Mi Tierra in San Antonio, put on a sombrero, eat a taco, and all of a sudden, hey, you're going to get all the votes. But now it seems politicians are a little bit more savvy in their ways, no?
Yes and no. I mean, they know that the sombrero still is effective. Actually, the last election cycle, Hillary Clinton was at the King Taco in East LA and was so taped up with police tape, I thought it was a murder scene. But what they usually murder is good taste. As a rule, I don't think there's enough Hispandering. I think there should be more.
The most obvious Hispandering example would be Jeb Bush. He did the ultimate Hispandering thing. He married an actual Mexican woman. And then
that's commitment.
That's commitment. Then he actually bothered to learn Spanish. He came out with this really bizarre commercial called Todos Somos Americanos, We're All American.
Los hispanos contribuyen cada día más a nuestra cultura. Son parte integral del sueño americano. Por esos motivos y más, yo les invito a que celebren el mes de la herencia hispana porque todos somos americanos.
But can you really hate a guy for, doing that attempt, no matter how earnest and clunky it may sound out?
Bring it on. He can speak better Spanish than everybody except Marco Rubio. There's video of him telling off a Dreamer activist who was begging him to consider immigration reform and help her parents out who need documentation. He just said, well, my wife didn't come over illegally, and it just shows the hypocrisy of Hispandering.
And don't forget, he's supposed to be the good one. He's supposed to be the one that gets us.
He's the Latino candidate, right?
Exactly. And now we're going to talk about a guy who I didn't even know was running for president, George Pataki, former governor of New York.
Y también a todos mis amigos que están con nosotros hoy. Gracias, amigas, siempre por la gente. Gracias por su apoyo. Gracias siempre.
I think he actually ordered a greasy chicken, is what he said in Spanish.
I heard a number 4.
Cuatro, the greasy pollo.
He actually said to women, thank you for the people. Gracias. Maybe he's thanking womankind for having babies. But, Pataki, whatever with him. Far more disturbing is Carly Fiorina. She actually had a Hispandering moment way back when in front of the Hispanic 100. The Hispanic 100 is only an Orange County thing. It's 100 Latino Republicans who say, hey, even though we're all brown, we're Republicans. So, yeah, we're cool.
All 100 of them.
All 100 of them, exactly.
Muchas gracias. Muchas gracias. I think every speech should begin with a shot of tequila.
Salud, viva México. Sí, señor. Viva California.
Carly not only gets a shot of tequila, she also goes like a little cha-cha or something like that.
Hey, I think the voters should be allowed to drink tequila before listening to any of these.
And it shows just how out of touch she is. No one drinks tequila anymore, at least not the cool people. They all drink mezcal nowadays. Next up, we're going to go with Ohio Governor John Kasich. He was trying to say something. He said that he likes Latinos and they're hard workers, but he ended it by saying,
they're God-fearing, hard-working folks. And a lot of them do jobs that they're willing to do. That's why in the hotel you leave a little tip.
What kind of tip do you leave?
Oh, my gosh, because we all know that all Latinos all work in hotels. That's the worst kind of Hispandering I've heard all day.
We have to go now to the Queen, Hillary Clinton, La Hillary, or whatever you want to call her. Recently, she was in San Antonio, and of course, she had to wear the corona, if you will, of La Reina de Tejano music, Selena.
I was just at the Selena Museum last week, and they worship her as a goddess and a queen. And of course, Hillary wants a little bit of that sparkle to rub off. I'm surprised she didn't wear a bustier. And I know that they played mariachi music. They had Sebastian, I forget his last name.
De la Cruz, the kid who sang it for the San Antonio Spurs that then got all this racist hate mail.
Yes.
And then the Spurs, God bless their souls, are like, screw it, we're going to have them sing it all the time now for us.
You know, to be fair to Hillary, if you're in San Antonio, I mean, mariachis play for the opening of an envelope. So their mariachis are crawling all over the place. Some real Hispandering would be smart is to get Julian Castro to be your VP. And I think she's making noises about that.
Oh, she's going to have to do that. I mean, hopefully, you get Julian Castro to be vice president. You get the Puffy Taco to be the Secretary of Commerce. That's what we really need. Anyways, it was nice talking to you, Lalo. I was Gustavo Arellano. I'm the more excitable, energetic one. And Lalo, who are you?
I am the mellower, wiser one. How about that?
Awesome, man. Gracias.
Thank you to Lalo Alcaraz and Gustavo Arellano for bringing us the best, or lo peor, in presidential Hispandering. We'll be bringing you more examples of Hispandering throughout the election year, but if you hear or see something, let us know. Tweet us at Latino USA. We've been talking throughout our show about Latino voters. There are 26 million Latinos who could be voting in the next presidential election. Now, that's enough to tip the scales one way or another, and the candidates know it. But when we spoke with Mark Hugo Lopez of the Pew Research Center, we learned that number could actually be even higher because of one particular group.
There are 5 million Hispanic adults who are in the country legally. They're foreign-born, they're immigrants, but they haven't quite yet become U.S. citizens. There's a lot of efforts to get this particular group to citizenships, in other words, having them apply for it and obtain U.S. citizenship, and ultimately they would then be able to vote. Among Mexican immigrants who are in the country legally, only about 36% ultimately take that step to become a U.S. citizen, and that is the lowest naturalization rate of any of the Hispanic origin groups. Many of these immigrants have been in the United States for 15, maybe even 20 years and still haven't quite taken that step. So that's really a potential pool of voters who could be pushed to citizenship and have an impact on Latino voter participation in the upcoming election.
That's right. The Latino vote could be bigger than we thought, maybe even sooner than we thought, if they just sign up for citizenship. Which is why it's important that politicians learn how complex a group we really are. That is, if they want to keep their jobs. That's it for today, and thank you for listening. Latino USA is produced by Fernanda Chavarri, Daisy Rosario, Lita Hartman, Marlon Bishop, Michael Simon Johnson, Antonia Cerejido, Julia Alsop, and Sarah Barrett. Julia Shu is our production assistant. Our engineer is Cornelius McMoyler. Nadia Raymond is our music consultant. And congratulations on your new baby! Our interns are Janice Yamoka, Gabriela Sierra Alonso, and Maggie Freeling. Nancy Trujillo makes it all happen every week. Our show is founded at the University of Texas at Austin. I'm your host and executive producer, Maria Hinojosa. Join us again next week, and in the meantime, find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Tumblr, and I'll see you on my Instagram. Hasta la próxima.
Latino USA is made possible in part by the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation and the Ford Foundation, dedicated to working with visionaries on the front lines of social change worldwide.
Hold on, it's only a sauna in here. Oh yes, the Latino USA sauna.
Support for NPR comes from NPR member stations and from American Jewish World Service, working for 30 years to end poverty and advance human rights worldwide. More at ajws.org. And the May Family Foundation, supporting Fountain House, committed to providing opportunities for people with mental illness to live, work, and learn through a community of mutual support. More information is available at fountainhouse.org. This is NPR.